first public meeting on UFOs or UAPs, commonly known as unidentified flying objects. The government does refer to them as unidentified aerial phenomena. This 4-hour meeting comes ahead of a report expected in the coming weeks here. Dr. Avi Loeb is a Harvard astrophysicist and joins us live to discuss more about all of this. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thanks for having me.
So a lot of people have heard the term UFO. We're now hearing about this other term as well, UPA. What exactly is that? I kind of want to go back to basics here.
It's just a name, and it implies objects that are not identified, perhaps flying in the atmosphere. There are some reports about them going into the ocean. We don't know what they are. That's what distinguishes them from familiar objects. And of course, you know, some of them may be balloons, some of them may be drones or airplanes or birds, but we don't know what they are because the images are fuzzy and the data is incomplete.
So many people equate UFOs or UAPs with aliens. Is that necessarily what we're talking about? As you mentioned, you're talking about other objects that just clearly haven't been identified. They could be pretty much anything.
Right. I think it's a mixed bag, and most of the objects are probably human-made. In fact, the Director of National Intelligence in the latest 2022 report to the US Congress mentioned that perhaps half of them are balloons. And we know that a few months ago, the US government shot 4 objects that looked like balloons. So it's very likely that many of them are unidentified simply because they are far away and the cameras do not have good enough resolution. The only question for me as a scientist is whether 1 out of 1,000 may be from an extraterrestrial origin. As a scientist, that would be very intriguing. I'm not particularly interested in anything made in China, but that's of course of interest to the US government and anything related to national security. So in a way, when we think about aliens, that's complementary to all other risks that the government assesses.
And of course, a lot of people do want to know if these are extraterrestrial in nature, even if it is just 1 out of 1,000, let's say. What is the significance of this NASA panel coming together and holding a public meeting for people to watch at home or wherever they are?
The most significant outcome of this is that it will legitimize the scientific discussion on this subject. You know, modern science allows us to use instruments that are very capable, such as telescopes, cameras, and in fact, we already built an observatory at Harvard University under the Galileo project, which is monitoring the sky 24/7 in the infrared, optical, radio, and audio. It's doing much better job than any past reports on UAP. And in fact, we have more data than in all past reports already. And we are planning on making copies of this observatory, placing them in many locations. So the Galileo project is already doing that, but there is still a lot to be done in terms of bringing legitimacy to the scientific discussion on this subject. And I think we can clear it out. We can, by looking at the sky, monitoring it for a year or 2, we'll have good enough statistics to figure out the nature of these objects. And we are also using satellite data, looking at the Earth from above, not just from below, and figuring out what these objects might be. And, you know, we are completely agnostic the way science is done. We already published 8 papers, just appeared in public last week. And the NASA panel is giving validation to this approach in the sense that, you know, there are objects that are clearly unusual, and we need to learn more about them. And the best way to do it is scientifically, not by having an opinion, sitting on a couch and saying, I think this is this or that, the way it was done for decades until now.
Do we expect that we're going to see anything, let's say, dramatic come out of today's hearing? Because as we mentioned, it's going to go on for about 4 hours, according to NASA.
Right. I don't think it will be dramatic because this study was focusing on looking at public data, not classified data. And so what it looked at is, evidence that we already heard about. For example, the Nimitz incidents where the Navy noticed objects that are peculiar. And as a result, I think what their charter is to recommend to NASA whether this subject is worth further study. And as I said before, I think it will give legitimacy because some of the reports are intriguing. Of course, the most interesting reports are classified, and I haven't seen them. I think the NASA study did not see them. Maybe people high up in the NASA hierarchy, in particular Bill Nelson, who was a senator, was exposed to the classified data. And as a result, he and other people under him give legitimacy to this study. And I think the best approach would be to gather new data, the way the Galileo project is doing, because the sky is not classified. It's only the sensors that the government used to collect this data that are classified. And so I think we have a good chance of finding out what these things are, as long as we allow ourselves to be curious and to collect new data.
And this NASA panel, of course, coming as we know that there is that Pentagon-led investigation as well. Is there any correlation or connection between the two, or are they both separate?
Definitely, there is a connection because while the NASA study looked at unclassified data, the Pentagon organization, which is called All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, is looking at classified reports. And the way they deal with them, according to the head of AARO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, is that they have two teams looking at past reports. One is led by intelligence experts, the second is led by scientists and engineers, and they vet what this data may imply. The problem with that approach is that it's past data, so it's limited to whatever you have, and you can't look farther into it. And moreover, it's anecdotal. It's all based on reports that were unexpected. And so instead, what we are doing as scientists in the Galileo project is a systematic study of the sky, where most of the time we see familiar objects, and every now and then we might see unusual objects. And this will give much better calibration as to what is the nature of this phenomena. And I think altogether, the more scientists are engaged, the better it is. Like any other scientific subject, we can get to the bottom of it.
I'm going to ask you a loaded question right now because I love to ask those. Why are people so interested in UFOs? In your opinion, when you hear about something like this, so many people grasp onto it and they want to know more. Why is that?
Well, a very simple reason. Two-thirds of the Americans believe in extraterrestrial intelligence, which makes a lot of sense because there are tens of billions of stars like the sun in the Milky Way galaxy alone. And moreover, a significant fraction of them have an Earth-sized planet at the same separation. So it makes sense. And this is, by the way, more than the fraction of Americans that believe in God, just so that you know. Moreover, there is a viral aspect to this subject, because if there is another civilization, it was most likely in existence billions of years before us, because that's the unit of time in the cosmic perspective. And it's therefore, if it arrived to us before we arrived to them, it's much more advanced than we are. So we can learn from it, and we can look at our future. And it's viral in the sense that maybe they're more intelligent than we are. So it touches the core of our existence. We tend to think that we are unique, special, privileged. But whenever you deal with superhuman abilities, it puts us at awe as to any phenomena like that. And of course, religion taps on that. The sense of God is related to a superhuman entity. And suppose it's real, suppose it's not what religious texts talk about as God, but it's actually a more advanced technological civilization that can create life artificially, and maybe even create baby universes artificially. That's an entity that previously we were at awe with respect to in religious texts. Now it will become part of science.
All right, Dr. Loeb, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. We appreciate it. A lot of great insight, and we know the meeting set to start here in just about 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for having me.